Welcome to The Lore You Know, a show where we chat with some amazing human beings who are storytellers, collectors, and folklorists as we discuss the history of, inspiration behind, and importance of recording and sharing regional tales. Today, I am joined by the amazing Kristin Puckett.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. First, I want to say I didn't realize, well, I mean, I knew this was yours because you have very distinct imagery, but Seth was bragging about how this is an original that he got from the Mothman Festival of yours.
Oh, I had no idea he was the one who got that.
Yeah.
He actually, the original sketch.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. It's in the office.
You get swarmed at the Mothman Festival. You don't know what's happening the whole time you're there.
I know. That's where I got to meet you for the first time in person, was at the 2019 one. And I didn't bring my Poplick print, but that's the one that I got from you there.
I have the original of that one that I'll give to you next time. I like to make sure they go to good homes, you know.
Oh yeah,
important.
He's one of my favorites. The Poplick.
Yeah, he was the second or third one I drew.
Mm-hmm.
Such a good story. He might have been the first one I did of an illustration in general, but of the anatomy studies. It was still pretty early. Such a good spooky story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, before we even get into the story part, can you tell us your place in the cryptid and paranormal community?
I like to think of myself as a collector and a listener. I don't put a lot of my own, well, I don't have a lot of stories to give, really. I have never had a paranormal experience.
Yeah.
Maybe one, but it's kind of like you're a kid. Everything's spooky when you're a kid.
Right.
So I've always just been fascinated by people who have had these really powerful, mysterious things happen to them. And a lot of people seem to dismiss their stories, or just like you've heard one, you've heard them all. But I like to really sit down, listen to them, and try to categorize them and ask questions like, what if this is real? What if every story everyone's ever told is real? What would that look like? And that's kind of what I try to offer.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular region that has caught your attention more than others when it comes to these kind of tales?
Well, my family is from Appalachia, so of course, right now, I kind of just focus on that, and I probably will never get out of that. There's just so much content, and I feel like I can't move on until I've covered it all. But even West Virginia, I recently did a book on all of West Virginia's lures, and still to this day, I get people messaging me like, "You forgot one." Yeah, that one.
Yeah. This is amazing. It's huge for those
huge.
It's a huge book, and you have so many in here that I've never even heard of.
Yeah. I've got, I think, 5 more to add to it.
Oh yeah.
It never ends. It never ends.
How are you getting these stories? You said people message you and tell you that you've missed one. Is that primarily how you?
Or that's primarily. I don't go out looking for West Virginia stories anymore. Now it's like I'll be researching Ohio, which is where I'm working on right now. And then there'll be like a footnote or a brief mention, and I'm like, oh no, I got to go back to West Virginia.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I meet people at conventions, and they'll tell me, you missed this one, or you got this story wrong, and that happens a lot. I'm like, well, now I have to do a subspecies or something.
Yeah. Are there any like really obscure stories that kind of caught your attention from people coming up and telling you about something that is maybe really localized?
Actually, my grandfather told me a story a few months ago, because he asked me what I did for work. And I kind of don't tell people that, because it's a whole thing. You have to explain the whole thing about it. And he's like, oh, we have a monster right here on our road. And I was like, I've never heard of that in my life. Our family lives on the same road, and we have our whole life almost. And he's like, oh, it's called Tommy Rawhead. And we always kind of mess with each other. Our whole family just lies all the time. That's just how we have fun. And you see if you can trick someone into believing something.
Sure.
And his name's Tommy. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he's like, no, I will get the thing for you. There's like a rhyme. And sure enough, it's a real thing. And it's based in European folklore, which our family came from Europe. I think we were one of the first families to travel to America and colonize. I don't know too much about our family history, but it's just really amazing and cool to think that that story has persevered through so many generations. So that's a new special story to me.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm going to ask you about that one later because that's really cool.
Right.
Um, so when we first started, we were talking about the Minerva Monster, and I was curious. One, is that one of your favorite stories?
It used to be my most favorite story. Over time, I've been exposed to so many others that I think maybe the novelty wore off. I grew up in the tri-state area, so it was like half an hour drive from Kentucky and to West Virginia, and I lived in Ohio. So I kind of was in the golden zone. But I grew up hearing about Mothman, Bigfoot, the Loveland Frogman, and then the Poplik Monster. And there was something so demonic and chilling about it that
Right.
it fascinated me. And as an artist, the opportunity to draw such a eerie bridge and the people jumping off of it, the fog. It's just
Right.
hard to. It's an opportunity you don't want to miss, and it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you go into what all is encompassed in the Poplik story?
So from what I understand, and I've never met anyone who can tell me about the story. The only things I've ever read or heard about it are online, or
Hmm.
like articles about people worrying about legend trippers, which are just people who try to live out a story or they want to investigate a dangerous spot. But as I understand, the Poplik monster is a satyr like figure or a demonic entity that has the appearance of a goat, and he lures people who are out at night when they're not supposed to, usually teenagers, to climb up this old bridge and jump off or get hit by a train. Depends. So I don't know why he does it. Just evil. There's a lot of different origin stories too. There's one of a Satanistic farmer.
Hmm.
There's one of like the devil himself, and then there's just he is a natural occurring creature.
Right. Right. Yeah. That theme, I feel like I've heard kind of mirrored in other Goatman type stories when it comes to a bridge in a Goatman.
Yeah,
The similar ideas about that. That then the legend trippers part, when I got to go down to visit, I've only been there once, but they had a memorial up for a young woman who had gone up on the tracks because that's a heavily trafficked piece of railroad there. I mean, it's an active railroad. Um,
right.
but I like that whole idea of legend tripping. Um, I don't know if there are any in our area that would be more dangerous to go check out necessarily than.
Yeah, I can't think of any. There are a lot of tunnels, but they're not the same type of dangerous. You
Mhm.
can see cars coming and going. I guess
Yeah.
maybe coal mines, that might be a bit of a problem further south. There's a few cryptids like Bigfoot and subhumanoids, those sorts of things.
Mhm.
I know my dad used to go caving, not for monsters, but to look for like rocks or cool artifacts. And he always would tell me the story every year. Something my family does. They'll tell the same stories every year during certain occasions. And when I was a kid, it drove me crazy. Like I've heard this story a million times. I don't ever want to hear it again. But now I appreciate it because I have it memorized almost. But he would tell me when they would go exploring caves that one time he saw this like arrowhead, and he wanted to touch it because it really drew him. and he reached out to grab it, but he kept having to go further and further into the cave. But
Mm.
the deeper he went, he started losing consciousness, and there was not enough air back there, and he got stuck. And so he panicked, which made the breathing worse.
Right.
And someone had to pull him out. Luckily, they were close enough. Like, don't ever go in caves.
Where was that cave?
Somewhere in Kentucky.
Wow.
And I don't think he ever got the arrowhead out either. Of course, he wouldn't
Probably
go
not.
back.
Oh man. Yeah, that's another dangerous thing, I guess, and one that you wouldn't think about necessarily.
Right.
Caves.
So, as much as I'd love to go visit different places where magical or awful things have happened, just to see it and really feel closer to it in a way, I always remember that story as like, remember the real life dangers that are there too, instead of just the fantastical ones.
That's true. That's true. So since the Popelic monster has shifted from one of your favorites to not so much the favorite now, what would be your favorite cryptid?
It's always a hard question to answer. Um, I'm beginning to love Ohio cryptids a lot more. As you're away from home, you start to miss the things that you didn't care so much about. I love the grass man, the leveling frogman's adorable, and I just love the idea of these little chubby amphibians walking around. And the Measy Beezy, which is a Native American folklore creature that's it's a aquatic catfish like monster with deer horns, and it guards the Ohio River.
Wait, what's it called
That's one of
again?
my favorites. I think it's pronounced Measy Beezy. It's
Okay.
spelled Msibissi.
Huh.
There's a little stone and um, plaque that shows like a carving they made of it. And I'd lived there my whole life and I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, me either. I'm in Ohio too, and I had never heard of that creature.
I haven't gone down to visit it yet, but that's one thing I definitely need to do.
Mm-hmm. When you're gathering all of these Ohio crypt, is it going to be a similar situation with a book that you're ultimately wanting to put together?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting with big feet and aquatic creatures. And I didn't realize how many big feet there are in Ohio.
I didn't. How many are
I think
there?
they're, well, the sightings are, I wouldn't even be able to tell you how many what I do is I look for the sightings and I look for similarities, and then I'll group them, and then I'll see if they happen in the same region. And then I'll say, well, this is one Bigfoot species. Because while I'm not trying to prove anything. It's just for enjoyment, you know.
Mm.
Uh, we'll see. I've been seeing things that are in common, like Wild Man of Enoch. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Nope.
Oh no. So they're like thin, big feet with long hair and long beards, but they're like a man.
Okay.
And they're about 5 to 6 feet tall. And across Ohio, there are slightly different variations. Their hair color might be different, or they might be more aggressive, but they all like they're rocks. They're all more human-like than ape-like. It's just like really fascinating. And then there's Orange Eyes, but the further south you go, his eyes aren't orange; they're yellow. And it's just a
Hmm.
strange note
Yeah.
of why would we be seeing or telling this slightly different. And then you can also see a pretty big difference in height. The swampier areas tend to have smaller big feet. Up north, the big feet are huge, and then Shawnee Forest, like 7 foot tall big feet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no explanation for it. Just maybe certain areas of people aren't very good at judging distances. Just you never know.
Yeah. What about the different names? Because what you say, Grassman, are there other nicknames like that?
There's like I said, the Wild Man of Enoch, Yellow Eyes, um, the Minerva Monster. Minerva
Yeah.
Monster's aquatic, I think. Yeah, there is a Bigfoot in Minerva. I'd have to pull up my
Yeah, he's in the
list. I
Minerva
think I've got about
monster.
12. Oh, he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, it's the
He's the
Minerva
one that lives
Monster.
in the water.
There is like a lake or a pond that was near where the sighting was, but I don't think he's necessarily in the water. He travels around a little bit, but
There was one someone was telling me about last year at the Scioto River. They saw a Bigfoot climb out of the water when we had that big flood.
mhm.
Like, that's an amazing story. I definitely want to do something with that.
Yeah.
And then there's more primate like big feet and that I've discovered that are more vocal creatures.
Mm.
And a lot of people in Ohio describe Bigfoot sounds more like dogs, whereas in my West Virginia research, they seem to describe them more like mannish sounds.
Mm. That's interesting. So if we go the opposite way from like Bigfoot to like super small creatures, what's like the smallest cryptid that you've come across, whether in Ohio or West Virginia?
I'm trying to think, there's so many to go through. Probably one of the insects. A lot of the insects are more supernatural, which a lot of people wouldn't, are not supernatural, old wives' tales, superstition.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people wouldn't count that as a cryptid. Cryptids, in the general sense, are usually these big, larger than life monsters, whereas uh, superstitious animals are more like mundane, but they have something magical about them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to be this kind of dragonfly that brings you good luck or can predict if you're going to marry in the next year or not. And there's
Right.
ladybugs that if you touch them, they'll bring you joy or you'll have a memory or it means someone's thinking of you.
Mm.
And there's no really real way to tell whether it's a magical ladybug or a normal ladybug. So sort of uh, my addition to the story is to make them more fantastical and hopefully more memorable so that these little sayings and things don't die.
Right. Yeah, I like that a lot. Um, what got you into all of this to begin with?
Um, well, I grew up around a bunch of storytellers and I was not allowed to watch or read scary anything, which I
Okay.
wasn't a rebellious kid, but one day I accidentally took a scary storybook from the library and I read it and I was like, oh, this is terrible, but I love it. So I just started getting as many scary storybooks as I could, and I'd like take them home and hide them. And then I'd also take animal books, and I'd read those, and I'd tell everyone animal facts and scary story facts. And I'd sit around and I'd write my own stories, and I just think, what would it be like if I met this thing? And I guess I never grew out of that.
That's awesome. Did you ever get caught with those books?
No, I recently told my mom about it, and she's like, I cannot believe you did that. You would have been in so much trouble. But we were I grew up in a really religious family, and it wasn't that we didn't have our own versions. Because I remember the first thing that was scary that I remember was my grandmother telling me not to do something. I think it was something about talking to dead people, like something real, you know, because I had seen a shadow at night and it made me really scared and I wouldn't go back to that room. And she's like, don't you open the door. And I was like, what door? She's like, if you open the door, demonic activity will happen. And then, so I had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so she had all these ideas and superstitions about things you shouldn't do, or you would, encounter these demonic spirits and how to tell the difference between demonic spirits and angels. And it was just very odd. And I've never been able to understand where she's gotten some of these ideas from. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not traditional Christian beliefs. It probably links back to Appalachian superstition. And I have it. It's really hard. I've looked for books on Appalachian superstition and witchcraft, but the information is not super available, or at least the books aren't popping up first.
Right. What's an example of one of those things that you're trying to find the origin for?
I'd have to look back at my notes. They were like you weren't allowed to do anything that is superstition from another point of view. Like you couldn't use a dowsing rod. You shouldn't say magic words, even if they're like fictitious magic words.
Okay.
Um, certain things about like walking in doorways certain ways, or if you see something like a shadow, don't talk to it. Don't ever use Ouija boards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many times my parents would sit me down and be like, don't ever do this. If your friends have you do this, you know, it will
Yeah.
ruin your life.
Oh man. Well, so now I'm curious, just because I know from our discussions that you play Dungeons and Dragons. Like, how would that go over?
Well, I played for the first time when I was 17, and I debated whether or not I should tell them about it. I did, and of course, it was met as you'd expect, because the religion in the game, somehow that translates into real. Like you're really worshiping these other gods, and these things are real in a spiritual sense. I was like, I explained it to them, and they were receptive, and I actually got them to play once, and I think they're a little bit more understanding now.
Yeah.
It's when you grow up in such a, like, everyone's the same, everyone has the same beliefs. It's hard to like take a chance, like listen and understand what these things that seem so scary are.
Right.
But they understand now that some things are just make believe. It's not everything's not serious. Not everything isn't some thing that's trying to steal your soul or corrupt you. It's just people like to enjoy imagining things, telling stories, and they they like my books now too, and they'll read other things and they'll watch scary movies and shows, but it disturbs them in a way that I've never experienced, because it's real in a way to them that it isn't.
Right. Right. Yeah. That was part of your Kickstarter, were some of the like RPG like the monsters in statistical form for gaming.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember you sent me a few to test out. I was in the middle of a Curse of Strahd campaign, which has been defunct now because of COVID, but I threw the Grafton Monster in, which had nothing to do with Curse of Strahd, that whole like layout, that world, but what we had a guest player that night, and so I had him like come in through a portal in the middle of fighting this creature, and it was the Grafton Monster that he fought. And the people that I was playing with, they just saw it as another monster. They weren't super excited when I was like, it's the Grafton Monster. They're like, whatever that is.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, but I mean, I found it entertaining, and as the DM, that's the most important part.
It is. Well, some people have just experienced the same monsters over and over. It's nice to have something you're not exposed to, and you don't know the weaknesses, you don't know their story. It's not just more difficult for the game and the players, but it's more like discovery.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Right.
Yeah, there's too many players that have memorized the bestiary.
Oh yeah. That's what kind of got me into making that version of the book. Like, this would be great. They won't know the stats because I don't even know the
stats. There you go. Yeah, I like that a lot. Oh man. So you said that you haven't like gone out and really investigated some of these areas where cryptids are, but if you could, and there were no worries about danger or like bears or cougars or anything, who would you want to seek out or go check out a location?
I guess some of the Bigfoot hotspots would be pretty neat to see. I've been in a few of them in Ohio, not on purpose. You just kind of end up there and you're like, oh, I've been there. Of course, I'd love to. There's this one cave. A person saw a giant humanoid figure with like bat wings, and I think it was somewhere in southern West Virginia, Cowboy Lingo Park.
Okay.
And I'd love to go there. Caves are dangerous, and I must go in one.
Have you gone to any regular caves, just like Mammoth Cave or
Yeah,
anything like that?
I think something about that story did the opposite effect to me because I'm like super into caves, and every time I see one, I'll go into it, but I'll just like set my foot in, not all the way. I won't go deep, but I have to go see what it's like inside. But I've been to um, the giant caves in New Mexico. That's probably my favorite place on the entire planet. It's just hours of just walking underground. It's just like I'm like I could live here. This is spooky and dark. Just it's like a different world. And then there's caves in Hocking Hills, which I'm sure you've been to. And then Carter Caves in Kentucky. Um, Mammoth Cave. I've been to there.
Yeah.
If there's a cave, I'll come visit it.
That's awesome. What are some cryptids that are associated with caves? I feel like we don't talk about them too much.
Uh, there's not a whole lot in our area, which is very, very wrong, and I will make up some to make up for it. um, there's only one in West Virginia, which is very, very loosely related to it. But I saw the opportunity that this thing has to live in a cave because where else can a giant bat live except Mothman? Because Mothman lives in abandoned buildings, or he did. He did at least at one time until they tore his house down. Um, Tippy Sanguizage, which it just is a fancy word for blood drinker. Some
Okay.
monsters don't have names, so I have to think of a way of making one for them.
Hmm.
So it depends on the creature. Like with vampires, you want something that sounds old and Latin.
Right.
That's like the tradition. But then you
Yeah.
have other things like these different types of water horses. And people like to give those fun, cute names. So for the Appalachian water horse, which is said to go in and out of water, I was like, well, he has to be named Winifred because that's what he looks like.
Yeah.
But other than the giant vampire bat, in Pennsylvania, I know of one called the subhumanoids, and they're like these little goblin creatures that live in abandoned mine shafts.
Hmm.
And apparently, some coal miners encountered one. They accidentally broke into like their home. I don't remember the story exactly. This was back when I was doing my thesis work, which was cryptid related,
Ooh.
and I drew a picture for a coloring book for it. And there were these white, huge-eyed monsters that were about 2 feet tall. And the men were so scared that they hurried up out of the tunnel and they refused to work that day. I think that's how the story goes, at least.
Yeah. Tell me about your thesis.
Um, I went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and part of the fine arts program is at the end of your degree program, you have to present your body of art and what it means to you as a person, what it means to the community. So I was so homesick being so far away, and it's dark all day in the winter. So it's still sad. So it's sad reflection time. And I was just thinking about all the things I miss from home. And oddly enough, it was like scary stories and like, spooky things and how that expresses humanity and how it kind of binds people together. Because when you share stories, when you talk about stories and repeat them, you kind of bind yourself to each other in a way.
Mhm.
You like I always think of my stories as like my children, and then eventually they go out and they find someone and they have more children.
Yeah.
It's just everyone's pieces are being put together.
Uh-oh. What happened?
I had a little phone call interrupt.
Oh, you had a phone call? Okay. All right. So children going out and mingling with other children.
Well, they become adults when
Right. Okay. Yeah,
eventually
yeah. Yes.
they mature, they evolve, they take on new features that you didn't give them that.
Mm-hmm.
But stories have always been a way I've connected with people. I'm pretty like quiet person, and I won't approach people. And every time I talk with someone, I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid. They'll never talk to me again. And I just sit at home for a week and I just think about everything I said that was stupid.
I do
So
that too.
storytelling, yeah, I've learned that it's a thing everyone does. So I feel better. And now I do like a podcast and I do interviews. And I feel like
Yeah.
I've grown as a person.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a writing people thing. Like people are more drawn to putting your thoughts and feelings on paper because you can kind of fine tune it and make sure what you're trying to express is exactly what you're trying to express.
Yeah, when I'm looking at the Grassman picture that we have here, and I was thinking of all the, I mean, aside from the imagery, you have little statistics that you put around the creatures. And
Yeah.
can you explain a little more about what inspires you to put particular bits of info? Is it something really unique that caught your attention? Are there certain things that are static between all of them?
For every story, I take it really seriously because not only does it mean something to me, but it means something to everyone who has had an experience with it or is connected to the story. So I want to make sure I get it right. So I'll do research into like local plants, local animals, try to make it as legitimate and native to where it belongs. And then I'll find every sort of mention of it. I'll make sure every detail is there. I think that that's important. So all these notes are every little bit of information I can find.
That's awesome.
And then the others are just kind of like tying it to an area and just showing that like I care about it and I'm taking it seriously and personally.
Yeah, and I that's appreciated for sure. When you talked about having some of your first exposure to this stuff was from the library books that you took. Are there any stories that you remember from those early books that really stuck with you over the years, whether they're ghost story or cryptid related or?
There's one. I bought this book. It was called In the Land of the Lawn Weenies, and you wouldn't think it was a scary story collection. And I've tried to find this book, and well, not too hard because I could find it on the internet because there's not going
Yeah.
to be a lot of titles, but no one I know has read this book or knows anything about it. Like, I know it exists somewhere.
Yeah.
There was this story about this family on a beach, and these sharks kept coming out of the sand and chasing them. And I don't know why. It's such a silly story. Like, that's
Yeah.
really weird. And I guess the more strange something is, the more it sticks with me. Because the regular scary stories, they're
Yeah.
they're good, but I don't remember them in detail. I don't remember anything in detail, to be honest. But I do
Right.
remember sand sharks.
That's great. What did you say that was called? In the Land of the what?
I think it was called In the Land of the Lawn Weenies, and it was a bunch of hot dogs mowing grass. And it was a scary story. It was a scary story about middle-aged dads mowing grass, and the grass was controlling their minds. It was a wonderful book.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I'm gonna look that one up for sure. That yeah, because when I was in elementary school, everybody kind of fought over the scary books in the library. The one, it was a red binding. It didn't have words on it or anything, but everybody knew which book it was. There was a red one and a black one, I think, and they were the scary stories to tell in the dark
Yes,
series.
yes,
Yeah,
I remember those.
you'd have to reserve that one because people were on a waiting list for that.
I think I only had 80 to 90 kids in my class, and you still couldn't rent that book. It was always gone.
Yeah, somebody probably took it at one point. I imagine. I can imagine
Yeah,
that.
probably. I think we had two copies. I worked in the library, and we had two like double copies of every scary story. At that time, I moved on from scary stories and I was reading King Arthur legends, so it didn't matter as much to me at that
Right.
time.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. Um, okay, so I am going to ask you to tell me a story.
Okay.
Um, so imagine that I am just hanging out with you at Mothman Festival and it's somehow during a lull in activity. Maybe it's pouring down rain or it's just so ridiculously hot as it tends to be and there's not as many people around. And I come over and say, Kristen, tell me a story. What would you tell me?
Well, first off, I'd ask you if you'd ever heard of Tommy Rawhead.
The answer is no.
No. So there's this poem, and every family tells it differently. I only know a small part of it, and I've looked at other versions, and they're all different. Kind of eerie in a way, because like this is a figure that's everywhere, no matter where you are. This guy's here, and it goes: Rawhead and bloody bones take people from their home, brought to a dirty den. They are never seen again. That's scary.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't believe in any monsters. Maybe the Black Panther. I'm a very skeptical person,
Hmm.
but when you're out at night in the woods, I live out in the middle of nowhere. There's just woods everywhere. You walk
Hmm.
outside, it's pitch black. You see all the stars, and all the sounds are loud, and you get a little scared. You think maybe Tommy Rawhead is real. Maybe that's what I'm hearing out there. And the story goes that during the day he hides in the dirt, but only under trees that have those big hollowed out spots.
Okay.
And he waits until the sun goes down. And if you're outside, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter if you have a light. He doesn't care as long as you're alone and there's no one else. So no matter how quiet you are, he can hear you, and you can hear him tunnel up from the ground. It's the first sound, but you have to be standing still and quiet. Then, if he's coming towards you, you can hear chains rattling. Because not only is this an almost omniscient man, he is ever living, and he was so evil that these people bound him with chains. But he's so powerful that he escaped. So powerful and hungry. But he's also so hungry that he just kind of thrashes about and scratches himself on the trees, on the ground, on people's furniture, that his whole body is raw and bloody and it never heals. My grandma would say he never heals because he's evil, and evil can't have anything good happen to them. So he's just like this epitome of evil and darkness. So he moves towards you, and once you've heard his chains, he knows like your soul. He knows exactly where you live, where you're going, what you're thinking. You hear the chains grow louder and louder, and if you don't run home, he will capture you, bring you to his den, and eat you, and you'll become part of his bloody bones, which are just a collection of all the victims he's taken throughout his whole life. But if you run home, you're still not safe because Tommy Rawhead can squeeze through any open space. And that's part of why he's all scratched up, because he forces his body in these awful, inhuman ways.
Yeah.
So if you're afraid Tommy Rawhead is in your house, you have to stay up all night and never open a closet or cupboard again. Because if you go to sleep, you'll hear his bag of bones rattling because he's coming to capture you. And you'll hear his chains rattling and like these really loud, thunderous stomps with him walking. He's like a larger than life creature that will fill up a whole room. And he'll get you if you go to sleep. But if you stay up all night when you first heard Rawhead, then he will hide in your house and wait for you. And he'll be sitting atop the bones. He's made like a den in your house. And if
Mm.
you open up the place where he's hiding and expose him, then you're dead.
So you can't escape him, is what I'm hearing.
You can move out. That's an option. or or just never open a closet or cupboard again.
Yeah, or sleep.
That's your that's it. Well, if you sleep, you're probably dead.
Yeah.
There's not really not a lot of options. So just don't leave your house by yourself.
Yeah, at night. Don't do it.
That's the moral of the story. Just don't.
Yeah. Wow. How how does that differ from in other areas?
Sometimes he drowns you.
Oh.
Sometimes the bloody bones are a figure of their own. And
Mm,
I guess in Southern folklore, it's a pig that Rawhide is a pig that also is bones.
mm-mm. That that upsets me more somehow.
No, no matter what, he's either eating people or eating children, and he's always really, really gory and murderous.
Wow. All right. Now I'm
That's the
gonna
first entry. That's the first entry in my new book where I'm writing a little poem that rhymes like the old one. It's going to be a lot
nice.
longer and
And
a lot.
I'm excited for that. When's that
I
coming?
was maybe a year. I was working on it last night and I had to stop because it was dark. I'm getting scared. That's when
Oh.
I was working on the ghost in the West Virginia book. It always I'd stop working because I'm like it's really dark in here, and there's just something about getting in that headspace when it's dark that it makes you afraid of things that you know you're just making up
Right.
at times.
Yeah. That's awesome though. I'm gonna look into this guy too, and I can't wait for your Ohio bestiary to come out. That's gonna
Yeah.
be super awesome.
Um, it's a real good one if you like to see the differences in folklore and how it's kind of evolved over the years and how different families have done their own thing with it. Because this is the coal miners version, I think.
Okay.
Because there's like a southern plantation, and I think slaves were a big part of how the story spread.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think further up north they have like their a different version too that's more tame. And the water version is only linked to Europe, a very
Really?
specific place in Europe.
Yeah. Where do you find this? Like what is your process when you start looking into these stories?
The internet. The internet is wonderful. And then
Mm-hmm.
really old archived message boards. Those are fascinating.
Oh yeah.
People would just say wild stuff in the early 2000s. And then, books. Old newspapers are great. Folklore magazines that aren't published anymore. The six, the 60s had a lot of really great preservation of old wives' tales and superstitions. There's a couple magazines I found from colleges back then, which is it's weird because they're hard to find
Mm-hmm.
for something that happened. So it's hard to find things that it's not that people don't care about them. It's just a lot of people aren't looking, I guess.
Right.
But they exist. It's just, you really have to dig to find things.
Yeah.
That and people will contact me, but more often than not, I'll just be going to the grocery store and talking to someone, and they'll be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you write monster stories? Well, I've got a story for you." And it's
Yeah.
usually the best thing I've ever heard every time.
Yeah.
It's always great.
That's awesome. Oh man. Well, I'm so glad that you took time to talk to me today. Can you tell us one upcoming projects and where to find you? And also your Etsy. Uh,
Yeah.
because this shirt's
Uh,
amazing and your
well,
bestiaries there
thanks.
and prints. Yeah.
I'm glad you like it. I post pretty frequently on Instagram under _folklore, and that's where I'll post pretty much all my work there.
Mm-hmm.
I sell prints and stickers and books and shirts and sometimes pottery when I have time to make it on my
Yeah.
Etsy, which is also Valley Raven. And I work on a sort of dramatic retelling of my monster collections through my podcast Orphans. I don't know if you've listened to it, but it's kind of like a radio show, but a nature documentary.
That's awesome.
And we just throw you in. These things exist, and we're gonna tell you how to protect yourself, like what their history is, what they eat,
I love it.
what their love life is. It's a lot of fun.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to listen to that today. Yeah. I saw the
Yeah,
post on Instagram about it.
it's a lot of fun. I enjoy making it. It just takes a lot of time to edit because we make our own monster sounds. So we'll so we'll just spend the day just like, what would a little ape that sings sound like? Well, we ask our friends or like relatives, hey, can you do something really weird for me today? We just need you to like screech really loud. But other than that, I have a website where I post all my findings. I'm trying to get the full encyclopedia entries onto this website because to me, it's not. It's more important to me that the stories are shared and like they're known. It's that's why I do it, is to preserve them and to like see them grow. And I want to see people appreciate them too. So
Mhm.
I have it's called Museum, or what is it? Museum of Monsters and Magic.
Oh, okay.
And if you go on there, it'll have a full list of all of our entries plus D&D stats.
Yeah. Nice.
So it's a lot of fun, and we're going to keep adding more and more to it, and try to get. Our goal is to cover everything completely, which will probably die before then, but hopefully I'll have someone to pass the torch on. So you have to
Yeah.
keep doing this. We
That's
gotta
right.
100% it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Make it a family business.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. And for anybody watching, if you have suggestions on who I should interview next, please leave comment below or send me an email at heather@smalltownmonsters.com. Make sure that you like, subscribe, join the channel, and become a squad member for more Small Town Monsters awesomeness. All right. Until next time.